Good afternoon, everyone. This is Amanda Ono, VP of Customer Experience here at Resolver. It's about 1 p.m. In Toronto, and we have a great deal of people logged in. So really excited to talk today about managing performance in a remote world. What does virtual collaboration, productivity, and team engagement look like? Like many of you, Resolver has gone completely remote. We went remote in our 8 offices around the globe about 2 weeks ago, and we're keen to share some thought leadership with our community on what we learned along the way. This is a quick 30-minute presentation, so slides will be available, and I'll make sure to hang out for questions at the end. So we're going to cover 4 main areas in this conversation. I'm going to come at it from the angle of how to enable your workforce as a manager or leader. And then we're also going to be threading in some employee level strategies that your employees may be able to add to their toolkit as they consider what it means to work at home in this new reality. So before I dive in, I just want to say that I know the world feels a little jumbled right now, and as employers, we're all determining the best way to stay connected. What's clear is that we do need to adjust how we work, and the when and the where of work is really shifting, while still balancing the drive for outcomes for our employees. We're hearing varying degrees of preparedness come from our community as they shift to remote. And so understanding that this change came fast and furious, I would say that it's okay to be, a little bit ad hoc as you build and learn along the way, and have compassion towards our teams as we figure stuff out as we go. I'm really passionate about culture, whether it be remote or in real life, as it helps drive business results. And my hope in all of this is that we're going to come out on the other side with better, more productive ways for us to work together and collaborate. So let's dive into our first kind of area. What does it mean to get in the work from home mindset for leaders? How we engage with our employees and set them up for success during this time is going to have a really long-term impact on productivity and engagement moving forward. And what we found is that, clarity helps foster productivity. The more clear you can be, the less people worry about the noise and the more they focus on work. This is a time where, as you're feeling, leaders need to be incredibly agile and responsive. So let's dive into some tips that might help you along the way. First and foremost, proactively posting communication updates. Many of us have taken a crash course in crisis communication. That proactive communication that's as transparent as possible is really important. I read some good guidance that communicating with employees at least every other day to help them feel connected is pretty critical. Next, role modeling. This is a key element of leadership, and how we model our behavior is really how our employees can end up feeling. This is called emotional cueing, and our focus here is to acknowledge the stress that the employees are going through, but then help them with the "you got this" attitude. Next thing is leveraging technology. If we're on this call today, this is something that we've been thinking about. I encourage folks to make sure their cameras are on when we're video conferencing. I'm going to get into some pretty specific ideas around this, but making sure small things like you have enough licenses, you have what you need to set up your team for success is pretty critical. The next thing we've really been thinking about is how you set norms for working from home. What does this new way of working mean for your team? And again, the more clear you can be, the more productive your employees can be. So what's the expectation for response time? What does it mean to be on video calls? All these things that we can clarify really help and set up our employees for success. Next is setting those daily check-ins. So this will depend on the size of your team, but we found it pretty effective. It can be only a 10-minute call, but one of the biggest shifts that we see in productivity is employees don't have that daily guidance or supervision that they would get from teams or managers. And so setting those check-ins really kind of helps set them up for success. Very important in all of this is keeping it human. As you've probably seen, everyone reacts differently, and being human and leading with empathy will go a long way. The human side of remote work can get overlooked, and so I'm, again, going to dive into some of those strategies that we can help to create emotional connection for our employees. So, as I said, we're building in a new mindset. Many of us have worked remotely before, but this is a whole different level. I gave some guidance for you from a leadership perspective, and I'm now going to turn to some tactical ways to set your employees up for success and set those norms. For some of these tactical examples, you might be thinking, shouldn't an employee already know how to do this? Many of them do. But for others, working totally remote is new. And so without those daily team check-ins, people might feel a little bit lost. I would also encourage you to keep in mind that there's a lot of distractions that people are facing now and fears. And so being deliberate and purposeful with our employees is a really key way to set them up with strategies that they can pull from their toolkit to be successful. So what do these work from home norms look like for employees? First and foremost, encourage them to create a space. Thinking about lighting, thinking about, noise and comfort and traffic as people are walking by is pretty key. I like the idea of perhaps they have a morning office and an afternoon office so they can move around and still have comfort within their homes. The second thing, really encourage your employees to structure their day like they're going to the office. Rituals matter, humans like structure, and in fact, our bodies get really used to these biorhythms that we create around going to work. So having a start time, going through morning routines, having break times and end times is really critical. End times is one that I personally struggle with. When you take out commuting, you feel like you have an extra hour or so in the day, but creating those boundaries are pretty important so employees can come back the next day and feel refreshed. The next norm that we really try to encourage you to set for employees is minimizing distractions. Social media, news, it can really distract us. I read some good research out there saying, reading no more than 10 minutes on COVID-related news is probably good for your mental health, and encourage your employees to think of it the same way. And then finally, communicate and set boundaries within your new office. This is particularly true for folks, most of us that live with others. So making sure the rest of the family and whoever you're cohabitating with knows when you have schedules, calls, and you've set those boundaries is pretty critical. So setting these boundaries can be a little bit more difficult if you have little ones. Many of us remember this clip of this very serious BBC broadcaster who's interrupted by a small child during a live feed. We encourage you from an employer perspective to lead with compassion. We're probably going to see some more kids on video calls and pets and family members. That's okay. I know parents are really trying to determine the best way to set up daily routines. They're kind of acting as de facto camp counselors for their kids while they try to work. And so from an employer perspective, if you can, try to set up as much flexibility in terms of hours as possible, and request that your employees are communicating if they need more flexibility to be successful. So now that we're getting in the work from home mindset, what does it mean to start being really productive? For many people, remote work is a time of hyper focus, and you've probably already seen a range in how people self-manage. Again, we found that when we're enabling our team members from a remote perspective, offering very clear guidance is helpful within their toolkit. So here's a really simple framework that I like. I'm going to dive into with some kind of productivity hacks, but a key thing I just want to call out here that we found that is very helpful is centralizing accountability tracking. So, having a place where team members can track activities and collaborate remotely is pretty important. At Resolver, we use Asana from that perspective, and also centralizing information, whether it be wiki, internet, or other technologies, so you can really communicate as a team is pretty critical. I think we're going to find more and more that one of the key ways of working together and collaborating together is really that shared visibility and that shared information. So encourage you, if you haven't yet, certainly can give some tips at the end for some strategies to do that. So, are we helping our team create daily goals, to-dos, and check-ins? So, really setting our team members up with project goals that are broken down into achievable tasks. And again, I know some of you might be thinking this feels a little bit like micromanagement, and certainly there's many employees that we won't find that this is necessary for, but how I think about it is, those daily check-ins are an opportunity to share accomplishments, and sharing accomplishments is what helps really drive engagement and connection during these times. The next thing is, how do we help the team prioritize? Time management really comes down to how we set priorities. Everyone has the same amount of time. It's how we can help our team members prioritize those key tasks that can help them be productive. So I like the strategy of kind of consolidating as a team all the tasks that you have so you can have an overview of what you need to work on, and then analyzing those tasks and stack ranking them. What I like about stack ranking is you can't have two tasks that are number one. As a team, if you're pushing towards kind of key activities, understanding that key priority is pretty critical to make sure your team is on track. Many of us have seen the urgent versus important quadrant, and I like this. And what I would encourage you folks to think about is if you have an opportunity to make a specific one for your team. And again, I think this helps make sure that the team is focusing on the highest priority tasks. What are those tasks that you really want them to do and focus on? What are the tasks that you want to make sure they're scheduling and putting into their day when they have some kind of deep thinking time? And those urgent and not important tasks, maybe they're, kind of minimizing those. And then finally, those not urgent, not important tasks, how can you help your team members remove those? So, this is a sample one, but, certainly if you have one, if you can build one specifically for your team, again, keeps people hyper focused on doing their highest value activity as they're working remotely. So now that we've thought about those daily to-dos and prioritizing, now we help employees get into the zone. So focus matters. Cognitive switching, can take a big load on us. The research kind of suggests that every time you get interrupted, it takes 8 minutes to get back into that cognitive flow. And the example that really resonated with me is that if you were to go to sleep and then wake up after 8 minutes, go back to sleep, wake up after 8 minutes, go back to sleep, wake up after 8 minutes. How rested would you feel? I think, new parents would say that's definitely not a very restful situation. And so the same is true for productivity. So, really helping your employees focus on the most priority tasks is critical. And then also help them with time blocking. We have some teams at Resolver that have, no meeting Wednesdays. I love that. You could even set a time block where you get people to focus on a group sprint of work so they're all focusing together. With that, coming out of those time blocks, carve time for distractions. You do need to recharge your brain. So probably every 60 minutes or so, carving some space to have distraction is still a good thing for your brain. But in the meantime, turn those distractions off, if you're trying to hyper focus. And if you can, turning email and instant messaging off is pretty helpful. If you don't need to access your phone all the time, having a mobile device free zone while you're in that focused area will help you be extremely productive. Even if your phone isn't going off, we tend to want to flip it over. And so, making sure we're hyper focused is really critical. And then one we found quite a bit of success with is finding that accountability partner. And this could be within your team or outside your team where they're touching base daily. I even like the idea of within your team, rotating those accountability partners so folks on the team can get to know each other within the team a little bit better. And so again, checking in and sharing those wins and accomplishments really helps engage and keep people on track. So the final part of all of this is then, revising and revisiting. After a few days, challenge your employees to analyze their results. What time of the day were they most productive? I'm definitely a morning person, so do really well then. Also challenge your team to see what they actually achieved in that allotted period of time. Most of us think we can achieve a little bit more within a period of time than we can. So making sure we're assessing that. And then, planning for tomorrow at the end of each day. This is a great best practice. I learned this one early in my career. And again, it helps set that boundary for employees so they can, close out their workday and come back and be refreshed and ready to go and be productive the next day. So we're getting in the mindset, we're thinking about productivity. And so how does this all translate to virtual collaboration? Being remote means that we need to challenge ourselves with how we can be more efficient with remote collaboration and, perhaps even meetings. And this is, an age-old question on how to make effective meetings, but perhaps this point in time will help us get on the right track. So some thoughts for virtual, collaboration during meetings. I always encourage folks to make sure they're testing the technology. Really make sure you're minimizing the duration of those meetings. I would say that the upper max of remote meetings is probably 60 to 90 minutes. Anything beyond that, I encourage you to split it out. Have an agenda and an objective. It may seem like a no-brainer, but I think all of us have dialed into meetings and we didn't truly know the purpose. Being very deliberate about the purpose of the meeting, understanding if this is a meeting to brainstorm, to make decisions, All those things are pretty critical. And then having that distinct agenda you can work through really helps with that effectiveness. Send prep work beforehand, um, with ample time to review. I'm a big believer that when you think about remote collaboration, a meeting shouldn't really be a presentation. Ideally, you're getting folks on the line for discussion and healthy debate on what you need to move forward. Perhaps even there's an opportunity to provide clarification during that time. But, sending around pre-work before so people have what they need to be successful is pretty critical. Next, pick a moderator. So having someone to make sure they're leading the call and working through the agenda is pretty critical. They're also kind of the timekeeper, making sure people are not going over time and making sure they're moving items forward, or perhaps putting meetings or putting items that are outstanding on another meeting agenda is pretty critical. But having a moderator is something we probably take for granted when we're in a face-to-face setting. Certainly we see people's body language and you see positioning in the room that helps us moderate meetings. So being deliberate about that moderator is pretty critical when we're remote. Next, if at all possible, encourage people during those meetings to minimize multitasking. Multitasking, they're finding is really the enemy of productivity. And so setting that norm for the team is pretty important. You probably wouldn't, in the middle of a meeting, get up and start working on another project. And so why are we doing that in remote situations? Again, if the meeting is well organized and focused, we should be able to achieve really good conversation and activity. And so what we need people on the line to be is very focused on the conversation. And lastly, to my point of being human, we use Zoom as a technology. And so every meeting I start, we Zoom around and we check in with everyone. This is also a helpful strategy from a remote collaboration perspective because it makes sure everyone's voice is in the room and everyone is kind of heard and has an opportunity to say what's on their mind. I encourage you to lean into questions about how they're doing and how they're keeping well and how they're keeping sane with their family and kids. That human element really helps with virtual collaboration because it sets the tone where people feel connected and engaged right away. So, virtual collaboration for employees, just some tips as we think about those video conferences. Again, many of us are very used to video conferencing. For some of us, it's a little bit more new. I have what I call the rule of five. If you have more than 5 minutes you're spending on an instant message platform like Slack or Teams, it's probably time to consider a phone call or a Zoom call, to clarify any gaps that may be happening. Encourage your team members to be on time. Again, having, those meetings kind of run efficiently is still pretty critical. So being respectful of time is critical. Let other people in your home know that if you're hopping on a video call, so that helps people be focused and within the call. I've even joked with my partner about having a red, yellow, green sign if I'm open for a chat or if I'm on a call. So making sure, again, you're carving that space for people within the home is pretty critical. Mute yourself if you're not speaking. Again, background noise can be pretty distracting, especially if we have little ones around. I will say, though, there are some calls where being unmuted the whole time is the norm, and that's great because if we're highly conversational and wanting to make sure people are engaged in that back and forth dialogue, that might be a very appropriate time to stay unmuted, but otherwise kind of muting yourself becomes a great best practice. Help your employees know how to frame the camera up properly. I've seen some pretty funny angles along the way, and so just reminding people of that function is pretty key. And encouraging folks, as they get used to this virtual collaboration, to make sure they're really speaking up and enunciating. Again, some of that body language that we get to see when we're together and face to face might be lost, and so making sure people are really crisp and clear about this is pretty critical. So we're getting in the mindset, we're thinking about how to be productive, and we're thinking about virtual collaboration. And so how do we bring this all together for virtual team engagement? Again, this is a topic I'm passionate about because of the strong relationship between productivity and engagement. There's many definitions of company culture, but this specific scenario makes me think about the definition that says culture is what happens when the boss isn't around. And so none of us are around each other anymore. And so being deliberate and purposeful as we work together is really important. Culture doesn't live in a department, and I think we're seeing that now that we're all dispersed. As I said, earlier about keeping it human, a key part of virtual team engagement is about empathy, really understanding where people are coming from. I like the change in terminology that's been recommended, that we change it from physical distancing from social distancing. Although we can't be within 6 feet of each other, I certainly think we can help employees with really rich connections through empathy and a few tactical strategies. So what can we do from a leadership perspective to help this along the way? Build social time into your day. It seems like a pretty simple thing, but I really recommend time blocking it. Even if it's a morning coffee together, it helps with that engagement. There's a company here in Toronto that sent out a company-wide meeting for a 2-hour lunch meeting, but the 2-hour lunch meeting was just so people could make sure they carve space to have lunches and connect with fellow colleagues, or even get out and get fresh air. Building that time into the day is a critical part of engaging people. Encourage those community pods. In every organization, there's groups of people that kind of get together. Encourage that to happen. Maybe even try to foster it. I'll get back to this idea of culture carriers, but many of our community pods can be those people that help us build culture in those activities. Centralize remote engagement activities. So, if you have an area, again, an internal wiki or anything where you can give a centralized source where people to go to get things like, virtual museum tours, zoo tours, workouts, activities for parents. Those are all things that are a proactive way that you can really support your employees to engage while remote. Have contests. As you saw the previous photo, we're having a best screen capture contest. Be quirky. It's got to fit with your culture, but have some fun with it. I think we're all going through a stressful time, so having humor throughout this is pretty important. And again, as I said, engage those culture carriers. These are people in our organization that can come up with great ideas. They're sometimes often in our HR team, but they can exist in any department. So tap those folks and ask them how we could be engaging people, and give them some leeway to test and try things, because I think we need to pull on as many resources as we can to engage folks. From an employee perspective, we've given some, pretty specific ideas to our employees. Getting out and taking a walk, if they can do it as a distance, is pretty key. My one-on-one conversations now are often done over the phone, and I just walk and talk so I can get some exercise. Having virtual lunches, or coffees or breaks. A few of our offices have standing lunch meetings where people can just Zoom in and still connect and chat with each other. As we're zooming around the room, perhaps testing different icebreakers for folks to make sure they have what they, to make sure they're kind of connecting and having some fun with it. I like two truths and a lie. I think that's a fun way to get to know people. Heard a neat idea about doing MTV Cribs remote edition, where people can move around on their webcams and show people kind of their personal office setups and familiarize themselves from a personal perspective. And there's lots of great resources for things that you can engage your team with: virtual trivia, virtual puzzles. Again, these are all great strategies to engage your team and create this sense of fun while we go through this remote situation. This is a moment in time where we're really changing the way we work, and we need to be, again, flexible with how we work, while still giving the employees the tools to deliver outcomes and to feel engaged. And we can't predict everything that's happening right now, but if you communicate to your employees and you help provide them with some proactive best practices to work and to have in their toolkit, you can help and encourage your team to know that they can achieve great results together. So that's a wrap. Really encouraging your workforce to get into a work from home mindset by proactively communicating, role modeling the mindset, leveraging technology, setting those norms and check-ins, and most importantly, keeping it human. Hopefully some of these productivity hacks to help manage accountability and give your employees a sense of accomplishment were helpful. Again, for some people, you might feel like it's a little bit of micromanagement, but I feel like it's giving employees what they need in their toolkits to be successful. Having highly organized meetings can help foster virtual collaboration, and really keep that conversation and engagement going. And again, be deliberate and purposeful with team engagement. We can still create those great connections with folks remotely, and maybe even more so now than ever. So hopefully you took some nuggets away that you can help your employees and your workplaces be more productive and collaborative in this extraordinary time. Again, these slides will be available, the recording will be available. We have about 5 minutes left, so appreciate, or 4 minutes left. We really appreciate everyone that's been on the line. And now we are going to flip it over to some questions if we have any. I will leave it. I think we have some Q&A. Yeah, thanks for the question. Justina and our marketing team is going to share these slides after the presentation. So that will be available to you. Do you have any recommendations for online trivia or puzzles? We have a couple that I would have to go get within that we're using in our organization. So you know what, I will make sure we include those specific notes in the presentation deck that we're going to send around after, because I think that's a pretty great strategy that you can use. So I will make sure those get put in the deck, and so you can use that as a potential tool as you go. Someone had a question around the concept of a community pod. So, what is this idea of a community pod? I think I see, what we tend to see from a people and culture perspective is there's these groups of people that kind of naturally congregate, and maybe they have common interests, and so how do they kind of get together and connect? So, if you have a group of employees at Resolver, we have a group of employees that all are keen to learn Spanish, and so they've kind of created this community on our instant messaging platform that we use, which is Slack, and they kind of connect that way. There's folks that love chess, and so they've connected and created this kind of group of this little community pod of chess. Chess nuts, and so they get together and kind of play chess. I think they've gone to remote. So I just think when you get a group of employees together, you're going to have some common interests, and so encouraging those common interests, and really as a company trying to provide some tools and opportunities for those common interests to connect, I think is a great strategy to increase that engagement. Question here. Working parents seem to be struggling. Yes, for sure. So, I wonder, again, a lot of this depends on how your workplace is set up. But I think for parents, if there's opportunities to have some flexibility, perhaps in the hours that they're working, we found that to be really effective, to carve out that time. And so I think we've provided parents with some tools that we've seen just kind of floating around that help provide schedules for those kids, and they kind of switch off between parents at home if they can. But I think in this circumstance, it's just really trying to be as flexible as possible. We have some single parents in our community as well at Resolver, and so I think for them, it's just making sure we're really flexible and being okay with the fact that we're going to see kids on Zoom calls, and that's okay. For those folks, especially single parents, we have to recognize as employers probably getting 100% productivity is not going to be super likely, and so just giving them the flexibility that they can, I think, is important. And then also just providing them tools that help structure kids' days, I think is helpful if you're able to. Okay, So, question on how people are communicating this info. So, how we kind of connect at Resolvers through an instant messaging tool called Slack. Microsoft has a similar tool called Teams, and so we find that instant messaging platform is very helpful for us. We also have a wiki that we use. It's called Confluence, and so Confluence is very helpful for us because again, it helps us centralize this information. And as I said, I think as we continue to track forward in our workplaces and rethink work, having that centralized visibility and that centralized source of truth is going to be increasingly important to us. Fantastic. Again, really appreciate your questions and engagement. This will be available to you, both the recording and the slides, and to the request out there, I'll make sure I put in some of those tools on online trivia and online puzzles because I think those are great tools. Thank you again from Resolver. I've really enjoyed connecting and hope everyone stays well and productive and engaged, and we look forward to connecting soon. Have a great afternoon.